Ethanol acts as a depressant within the brain, meaning that it slows down the function of nerve cells. It does this by messing with the brain's neurotransmitters, which it can do because ethanol is such a small molecule that it can pass through the tight capillaries in the brain known as the blood-brain barrier. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers used by our nervous system to communicate with nerve cells and muscles. There are a number of different types of neurotransmitters, but alcohol mainly affects three: GABA, glutamate, and dopamine. Ethanol increases the effects of GABA, which is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, which means it decreases electrical activity in the brain, slowing it down. Ethanol also reduces the amount of glutamate in the brain, and glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter, so reducing its effect also slows the body down. Both of these effects are why after a number of drinks we might have difficulty speaking and poor coordination. And dopamine? Well, you would think that the onset of these effects would signal to most of us to stop drinking. So why do we often end up lining up at the bar for another drink? Ethanol increases the amount of dopamine in the brain's reward center. This increases the feeling of pleasure when we drink. The level of pleasure we derive from drinking is not the same for everyone. Some people's genetic makeup makes them feel considerably more pleasure than others. These people are at high risk of being heavy drinkers and developing alcoholism.
In the liver, an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase, which is also present in the lining of the stomach, which we will call ADH, oxidizes the alcohol or ethanol molecule. In basic terms, this means that the enzyme comes in and changes the chemical structure of ethanol. So ethanol becomes acetaldehyde. This substance is known to be toxic and carcinogenic, or in simpler terms, poisonous and cancer-causing. This acetaldehyde is then metabolized down to a substance called acetic acid, which is less harmful to the body. Acetic acid can then be broken down into carbon dioxide and water.
What exactly is going on inside of a depressed person? Is there a biological basis for these intense feelings of sadness? In the past, depression was often described as simply a chemical imbalance in the brain. Specifically, scientists believed that a lack of the neurotransmitter serotonin was to blame, which is often referred to as the feel-good chemical. However, the only real evidence for this was that when some depressed people were prescribed drugs which increased serotonin levels, it helped alleviate their symptoms. But while chemicals most certainly are involved, this view doesn't really capture just how complex depression is. In recent years, scientists began to notice that the brain cell growth and connections may actually play a larger role. When we look at the brain of a depressed person, studies show that the hippocampus tends to be much smaller than average. Other areas of the brain are also physically affected, but this region in particular controls memory and emotion. And the longer a person has been depressed, the smaller the hippocampus becomes. The cells and networks literally deteriorate. It turns out that stress may actually be a main trigger in the decrease of new neurons in this area of the brain. In fact, studies have shown that when this region of the brain is regenerated and new neurons are stimulated, mood improves. Interestingly, many modern drugs, including those which affect serotonin levels, have an indirect effect on the growth of brain cells. This is likely why serotonin-based drugs seem to help some patients, but not for the reasons we once thought. Instead, they promote the release of other chemicals which ultimately stimulate neurogenesis or the growth of new neurons. Knowing this, some scientists now believe focus should be on drugs which directly affect neurogenesis.